How does the budget, do you think, will affect under your leadership for law enforcement and those that are affected by law enforcement, not only through the agencies but out in the streets?
When you look at the role of government, the budget has to reflect what the Constitution sets forth as the legitimate role of government. The purpose of government is to protect our citizens' rights to life, liberty, and property, and the way you do that domestically is through law enforcement. That means we have to cut elsewhere, but we have to make sure that we don't cut law enforcement. You may remember when this young girl, Arena, was murdered on the Charlotte light rail, and we actually saw a film of that taken by a bystander. Was absolutely horrific. When that happened, our campaign was the only campaign in the U.S. Senate race in North Carolina to call on President Trump to stabilize the Charlotte light rail by sending in the National Guard. About 2 weeks after that, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Fraternal Order of Police joined in that call. And after the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 90, joined in that call, I spoke to the president of the lodge, and he told me that Charlotte-Mecklenburg police have fewer officers on the street today than in 2016, 10 years ago, despite the fact that the city has grown by a population of some 85,000. And this is absolutely inexcusable. So when we're talking about law enforcement, we're talking about budgeting at both the state and the federal level. Of course, I'm running for a federal office, but I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that while we have to cut other areas, a lot of fluff, a lot of stuff out of the welfare state, a lot of this DEI stuff, a lot of the junk the Democrats are handing out like lollipop for these fat, spend-happy programs, law enforcement budgets have to be beefed up. And I like to listen to law enforcement. I was with Sheriff Sam Page a good portion of the last couple of days. I have a number of sheriff friends, and I really have great respect for our sheriffs and police officers around the state. And we want to listen to them to determine what it is that we need to most effectively combat crime and keep our people safe. Cutting the law enforcement budget is something that to me is not on the table, while cutting other parts of the budget has to be a major part of what we do with budgeting going forward.
And yeah, sounds good. We got to, because the law enforcement took a pretty hard hit when the folks on the left started defund the police and all these other kind of crazy things that they threw out there. And but anyway, so the other thing that your term limits. Where do you stand on term limits? I see that come up often.
Well, here's the way I look at it, Rick. We have a thing in the Constitution called a 22nd Amendment. And the 22nd Amendment limits the President of the United States to 2 terms. To me, it makes no sense to limit the President and not limit members of Congress. However, there's a flip side to that. And you got to remember that if you're going to limit members of Congress, which I think you have term limits for all branches or none, if you're going to limit members of Congress, the problem is that if you don't get rid of these bureaucrats, then the bureaucrats become even more powerful. In other words, let's say I'm limiting a senator to 2 terms, which I think is fine. It's 12 years. But if the bureaucrats inside the Internal Revenue Service are going to be there for 30 years, or inside the EPA are going to be 30 and 40 years, they'll know they can outlast the senators and members of Congress. You've got to cut the deep state at the same time. So there has to be a complete whacking across the boards. I believe that absolute power corrupts, and power corrupts absolutely. But term limits have to be accompanied by eliminating members of the deep state so that you don't make the unelected bureaucrats even more powerful than they were before.
Yeah,
but let me just add to that, because it's a good question, and I point this out. Joe Biden was initially elected the same year as Jesse Helms, 1972. He came into office in 1973. If there were a 2-term limit to the United States Senate, say of 12 years, he would have gone out of office in 1973, 1985 or so. He would have gone out of office, and you would never have heard from him again. Instead, he stayed for, it seems like 100 years, from one century to the next, literally, and became more and more corrupt. Look at Nancy Pelosi, been there forever. But again, you've got to cut bureaucrats if you're going to impose term limits on the Congress. That's got to be done anyway. So it's got to be a whole package approach, in my opinion.
Yeah, before you move up, you got to move down, because if you don't, If you let the same people at the top, then people at the bottom just all you do is change the faces, and you got the same problems. And that's kind of the reality of it. Now, how about the Judicial Separation Act that you're talking about?
Yeah.
I'm very interested in that.
Thank you. Well, that's a very good question. Thank you for that. Listen, when the Constitution was first passed in 1787, it had to be ratified, and it took well over a year to get it ratified, and you had to have 9 states. And the biggest fear the states had were out of control judges. So James Madison in Federalist 78 wrote Federalist 78 to try to assure the states they had nothing to worry about. And he said 3 things we should keep in mind now. First off, he said that the judiciary will be by far the weakest branch of government. So the whole notion of co-equal branches of government, that's the separation of, that is a constitutional fiction, just like separation of church and state. But above and beyond that, Madison also said that the judiciary would have no power over either the president or the Congress, because as Madison said, the judiciary, the Congress has the power of the purse, the president has the power of the sword. But they have, as my granddad used to say, turned that notion bass backwards, he would say. You know, we have 670 federal judges now. About half of them are Democrats. They think they can order the president around. Just like when Trump came into office, one of his first acts was load up a bunch of illegals and send them on a plane to South America. This Judge Boasberg in D.C. tried to order him to turn a plane around without authority. Now, Trump ignored that. Well, here's what the Judicial Separation of Powers Act would do, and thank you for asking about that. Number one, it will remind these federal judges of the limitations that they have under Federal 78. They don't have power over the Congress or President. And number two is specifically take away any and all authority that they think they have, which in reality they don't, which they think they have over the United States military and also over immigration and naturalization. The Congress has the power to ring these judges in. Congress created every court in the United States in the federal system other than the U.S. Supreme Court. But Congress creates, Congress can rein in, and I will stand in the will of the Senate, and I will advocate for reining these out-of-control federal judges in, because the Democrats are using lawfare as a weapon to attack the Constitution and to subvert the people's choice.
Seems like the judges want to legislate from the bench and not let the legislature do their job. Anytime that you get the judiciary overstepping a presidential power,
right?
People give Trump a hard time, but if he was who he said he was, everybody thinks he is on the left, he'd ignore the judges and start putting them in jail. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm just saying it like it is, because I mean, if he's as hard about it as they think he is, and he's this dictator. Dictators don't ask about anything. They don't abide by judiciary rulings, and then they act and they just lock people up. I mean, look who we got in custody now. You know, what would he do? What do you think Maduro would do?
Well, I mean, he would execute the judge. He would
Exactly.
They would go to totalitarian measures. But if Trump were really a dictator, he wouldn't have left the White House when they clearly appeared to have stolen the election in the 2020 election. And the courts continue to overstep their boundary. Just this past week, the Supreme Court, in a decision called Illinois versus Trump, came up with a 6-3 decision claiming that Trump could not deploy the National Guard to Illinois because there needed to be more evidence presented under what we call the National Guard Federalization Act. Justice Alito, Justice Thomas dissented from that. I agree with him. They're adding new requirements to that existing law. But above and beyond that, the Supreme Court, nor any federal court, in my judgment, has any authority to step in and interfere with the presidential deployment of troops. That is what we call a violation of the separation of powers. Only Congress and the executive have control over the United States military. The the courts do not. And so, even the Supreme Court itself oversteps boundaries from time to time, even with a Republican majority. And only 3 Republican justices, Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, stood in the trenches and said, hey, this is beyond our authority. You had Roberts corralling Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh to vote with the Democrats. And so it becomes a frustrating situation, but I have called the court out. I'll continue to call the court out when they step out beyond their constitutional boundaries, and they did so in that particular instance.
Well, they do that quite often. It's kind of interesting, I always listen to people complain about rulings from the left. They complain about every ruling that comes out, but when they score a victory from somebody from the right, they're not going to give them the quote unquote accolades because they're waiting late for another shot at them, for the next time they don't do something. And that's always that's the generation of politics, because no matter what you could do, it's like somebody says, we got a president. He could walk out there and he could walk across the water, and the only headline is you'd get is the president can't swim. That would be your headline of the day. So and everybody's too busy fighting, not government. They're too busy fighting one man, and until the people on the left realize that we're not just one man country. We're one country for everybody, but they've got it reversed. And I'm thinking, what is it? I mean, what is it that they really want? They just don't want this individual that they despise in power because they lost an election. And as sad as it is, so I keep up with the news. I keep up with current events. I try to keep up. I'm watching the news tonight, and they're talking about all the shootings and the murders and the killings in North Carolina right now. Just tonight alone, it's like that's all they talked about from one town: Fayetteville, Durham, Raleigh. Right. I mean, it's all over the place, and we just have to buckle down and figure out how do we get the people, when you have somebody that constantly wants to veto certain bills that will help law enforcement along the way gain control and send a message that we are one state belonging to one country, one nation, under God, for everybody. It's hard to do that when people that preach that run it straight to the left and don't want to hear anything anyone else has got to say. So it's a struggle, and I commend anybody who wants to run for office. I did it, and I won't say never. I never say never. I learned that a long time ago, but I would be about 98% sure that that never for me. It's a tough battle out there. You got people shooting you every day with all kinds of issues. So I applaud you and commend you for running. Now, what would you say to the public that makes you a different candidate from anybody else in this race? Why should North Carolinians vote for you?
It's a pretty easy answer. My principal opponent, Mike Watley, is a lobbyist. He's a professional lobbyist. Other than the time he spent as chair of the North Carolina Republican Party, he's been in Washington just about all his professional life. I'm a military officer, and I've been involved in attacking a lot of issues and conservative. We represented January 6 Patriots during the Fed version when the Biden Justice Department attempted to prosecute everyone for the most ridiculous charges. President Obama's suicidal and foolish Trump and pardoned one of my clients, Lieutenant Clint Lawrence, who was being prosecuted under ridiculous rules of engagement scenarios in Afghanistan, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for quote-unquote murder. Pete Hegseth and I worked that case for almost 2 years. President Trump pardoned Clint in November of 2019. I've also had one of my J6 clients, Elliot Bechet, pardoned as well. I'm one of a very small handful of lawyers in the United States that have not one but two presidential pardons from this president, Donald J. Trump, because of political reasons. Also, I've been active in the medical freedom movement. While Michael Watley sat in the Republican headquarters in Raleigh when he was chair of the North Carolina Republican Party, urging people to take the jab and actually saying that it's a matter not of politics but of science, which led to people getting hurt and even dying because they took that dangerous jump. I was out fighting the jab, filed a lawsuit on behalf of 78 plaintiffs in federal court in South Carolina, went to the appeals court, saved the jobs of those folks. There were 78 some plaintiffs, most of them nuclear engineers. I've also been involved in battling for election integrity, served on 3 separate teams, one along with Sidney Powell during the 2020 election fiasco, one under former Chief Justice Mark Martin of the North Carolina Supreme Court, which led to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton suing the state of Pennsylvania, and a third under Linda McLaughlin, Sean Hannity's producer, where he pulled data concerning irregularities from these ballot marking devices. We've been endorsed by Sidney Powell. My campaign has been endorsed by General Mike Flynn, the 24th National Security Advisor of the United States by former Delta Force Commander General Jerry Boykin, by Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. We have the endorsements of the most significant conservative military officers in the nation. I will be a soldier and sailor's senator. I understand the military. I've been in the military, and I fought these battles. Nobody else with respect has a record for standing in and fighting for conservative causes that we have in our campaign. It's not even a close call. We have also been endorsed by more grassroots organizations by far, I'm talking about from North Carolina, than any other candidate. It is a no-brainer. Michael Whatley cannot defeat Roy Cooper. I can defeat him. I'm the only former criminal prosecutor in the case. I know what it's like to put people into prison. I've done it before. I'm going to chase Roy Cooper all over the state, in every corner of the state, and prosecute him for his failed liberal Democrat agenda when he violated the United States Constitution with his mask mandates and with his vaccination mandates. I'm going to wish he's going to wish he'd never heard of me before this race is over, and I am the only candidate capable of doing that. And it's not even a close call as to who we need to support in the Republican primary with respect to my opponents.
Now, I heard earlier tonight, the first time in a while, one of the TV news stations talked about the J6 and everything that went on January 6th. And they came out and said that one officer was killed during that event. And I'm not aware of any officer was killed during that event.
Let me clear that up. That's hogwash. You have ignorant liberal reporters, including the former chair of the North Carolina Republican Party, Mike Whatley, my opponent, who claims that people died, officers were hurt or whatever at J6. Only one person was killed at J6. That's Ashley Babbitt, who was a Trump supporter and an Air Force veteran who was shot in cold blood by Capitol Police, period. So you hear a lot of ill-informed junk from left-wing reporters who want to engage in revisionist history. If you heard an officer was killed on January 6th, it is an absolute lie from the pit of hell designed to push a left-wing narrative. It simply isn't true. The truth is that only Ashley Babbitt was killed at J6, nobody else was. So don't let anybody fool anyone who's listening to that garbage. The truth is it's only Ashley Babbitt who lost her life at January 6th.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that because I heard that tonight, and I'd had that conversation a while back with somebody from Reuters called and wanted to comment, and they brought up that, and I said, "Well, tell me who was killed," and right. They couldn't give me a name of any active law enforcement officer that was killed, and to this day, they stopped questioning about it, and I never saw anything mentioned about it in Reuters. So.
Rick, not only were no active law enforcement killed, not only were no active law enforcement officers killed on J6, but active law enforcement officers actually welcomed Trump supporters into the Capitol. And when you look at, for example, the video that was released by former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and played by Tucker Carlson, what you will see is that even Jacob Chansley, the so-called QAnon, who was supposed to be the face of the conspiracy, he was let in all around the Capitol by law enforcement. They're chumming up with each other. They let him into the Capitol. So you're hearing a bunch of revisionist lies from people that want to rewrite history and continue to try and blame Trump supporters, when in fact, this was a Fedsurrection, which in my opinion was planned by Nancy Pelosi and others. Trump offered to send the National Guard. She had the authority to accept that. She rejected it. As she said at one point, it was on her. January 6th was on Nancy Pelosi, and the aftermath is a Democrat concoction from the corrupt Justice Department of Joe Biden to try to rewrite the history, rewrite the truth of what really happened.
Well, I saw the clips too, and it didn't look like that the law enforcement officers were actually giving them a tour at some points. Even when all this was going on, they were letting them in. So it just was kind of, as an internal affairs officer in law enforcement, I did that 3 different occasions, and I can tell you, looking at the video and listening to the spin out there, it didn't really seem to be matching up from a standpoint if I was to investigate it as an internal affairs officer. because I would have loved to have all the information and look at it. But it leaves a lot of questions, that's for sure. And
Sure, right.
there's people out there who believe one way, one believe the other. But the bottom line is, kind of the video doesn't tell a lie. It tells you the truth. So it's kind of hard to escape the video and all that footage. I think the footage should have been released long before it was released, because it would have probably stopped a lot of nonsense in the process.
Agreed.
And anytime like that happens. So I agree with that too. And so what would you do day one of your tenure after you were sworn in? What would be the first action you would take?
First action I would take is I would submit to the Senate a bill called the Deep State Reduction Act, which would require that 2/3 of all federal employees that are non-military be eliminated from the federal government. They require a reduction of 2/3 of all agencies eliminated from the deep state, and mandate that all savings be applied to the national debt. That's the first thing I'll do on day one.
Okay, and who would, in past, present, who would you say is probably one of the best leaders that you've ever come in contact with, or in history that you would
Well, that I've come in contact with, I would say probably the great Jesse Helms. I've come in contact with Jesse Helms. He was one of a kind. He never cared what the press would say. He would stay true to his conservative values. Ronald Reagan and Donald J. Trump are the two greatest presidents of my lifetime for sure. But I would probably say Helms, given the folks who I've come in contact with in terms of stalwart conservative leadership.
I actually met Jesse years ago as a young officer, and actually met him one day, and then 30 minutes later met Ronald Reagan at Duke. So it was kind of interesting to meet two people like that in one day. Two power, what would you consider power Republicans? So it was always like I said, we didn't hang out or anything, but it was about a 30-second meeting with the president and probably about a 2-minute with Helms while we were waiting for the president. So that was something that I always kind of look back to and everything. So what are your hobbies? What do you like to do when you're away from all the politics and the courtrooms?
I like to read, and I really like to write. We have 16 books that have been published, and I enjoy writing. It's kind of like a relaxing thing for me. I've written 16 that have been published. 15 have been on the military. I've got some ideas for some more books, and I really like to do that. I like to just go to the beach and just kind of hang out, strike a good stogie, to tell you the truth, on a Adirondack chair or something like that, and take it easy. And I like to read, so just kind of chill out. I like to walk a lot, and really kind of a boring life I have away from work, but those are the things that I like to do.
Was kind of like, you like the relax mode, because it sounds like you're going 100 miles an hour out there. Everything you're popping up everywhere. I don't know how many news stations you've been on, but it's been a lot, because every time I go to one, there you are. So yeah, you're definitely getting the message out, and it's always tough to run against somebody who's endorsed by somebody else, but really in this day and age, endorsements, they matter.
Well,
but when it gets down to it, the people will make the decision based on what they know, not what somebody tells them they need to know.
Well, Watley may have a significant endorsement. We have more. We have General Flynn, who should be president himself one day. We have General Boykin, Delta Force commander, who's taken bullets for this country and almost died. And Alan West and Sidney Powell, and Brooke McGowan, the great Brooke McGowan, has endorsed us as well, who's going to be the greatest Republican Party chair in North Carolina history for us. You watch her. She's a rising superstar. And I'm telling you, I wouldn't swap my endorsements for anybody else's endorsements. And I'll stand by those 5 any day of the week and twice on Sunday. So I think people ought to be talking about our endorsements as well, because we've got some powerhouses.
Yeah, I saw. Did you get Turning Point? Was it? No, I thought you had gotten that. Yeah, no. Well, I mean, I thought for some reason I saw something on that, but I think that anytime that you get it, whether it's whether it's the president's endorsement, whether it's the turning point, when it gets down to it, people are going to look what affects them locally in their local states.
We're endorsed by the North Carolina. Hear that word? North Carolina Patriots Alliance. Here's another word: the Veterans Party of North Carolina. You hear that North kind of part? The Franklin County Patriots. Hear that? Franklin County North. That's North Carolina. We're endorsed by the Asheville, North Carolina Tea Party. We're endorsed by Fix Bunkum. Our endorsements are North Carolina endorsements. We're not interested in some endorsements from out in Arizona or north of the Mason-Dixon line. We're running this race for the people of North Carolina. We have the grassroots endorsements. I will put our endorsements proudly up against any endorsements out there, barring none, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, the local endorsements make the bigger bang, so to speak. It's always, I tell everybody, you can look to the big national elections where everybody in the United States votes in that direction. But when it comes down to it, you better look at your state and the local, because if you don't control that, the rest of it doesn't really matter.
I'm not running for a U.S. Senator from Florida. I'm not running for U.S. Senator from Arizona. I'm running for United States Senator from North Carolina. North Carolina first, baby. And that's the way it's going to be.
So that's why I wanted to hear, because I want you to tell everybody, because I always want to hear about North Carolina more than I do on the national level, because
absolutely.
National level, you can put it out there, you can get in and you can say and do, and that's great. But like I said, I'm North Carolina. I want to see how North Carolina is going to be affected by our North Carolina folks that are running, doing things here, because we're going to feel it at the state level long before we feel it at the federal level.
Absolutely.
And the local levels too. Well, I know you got another interview to go, and you're getting ready to hit, was it one of those other channels?
Well, I'll be on Newsmax here just in a few minutes. But I can't tell you how grateful I am for the opportunity to spend some time with you again, Rick. And I hope we can do it again soon. You asked some really, really good questions, and I really appreciate the opportunity to show support for my friends in law enforcement. I've got your backs. We'll always have your backs. What happened with the defund the police was a travesty by communist Democrats. The officer Chauvin should never have been prosecuted, and I will stand for law enforcement and for the blue all day of the week and twice on Sunday. So thank you for what you represent, for your service, and for the service of those who also protect us through our great law enforcement agencies.
Well, one thing about it, we know it's a hard road to freedom. It doesn't come easy, does it?
Freedom is never free and never comes easily. Absolutely.
Well, we wish you the best of luck, and we'll definitely follow up. I'm going to do this to anybody who wants to come on, anybody who wants to talk. Like I said, we don't do any pre-interviews. I don't set up the questions, and we just go at it. We just have the conversation, and I'll ask the questions. And you were the first one to jump out front and ready to go, and I wasn't surprised by that. And wish you the best of luck, absolutely. And we'll do this again once or twice before the election.
All right, thank you so much.
Even if you're in the car, we can still conduct with the interview.
You got it. Thank you.
And that's fine. And you have a blessed night and a great week. And, I always tell everybody, always be right, always be real, and always be ready. And you'll be just fine. So you have a great evening, and good luck to you, and we'll talk again.
Thank you, Rick. We'll see you next time. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, folks, there you have it. We talked to the U.S. Senate candidate, Don Brown, and he's told us exactly what he's thinking about, and it's definitely worth watching, worth listening. It may, you'll hear it, you'll listen to it, you'll make your decision up on it. I'll ask the questions along the way, and we don't do any gotcha questions, because I don't think there's such thing as a gotcha question. If you're familiar with your topic, you know what you're talking about, you know what you're going to do. Campaigning is never easy. It's always tough, and I applaud anybody who's willing to jump into the limelight. I've did it twice, and I will tell you this: it is a battle and a half, but it's one that I thoroughly enjoyed, and don't know that I'd do it again, because there's so much more things that I can do in different ways to bring out the information. I'll extend the challenge to anybody out there that wants to come on the show. I don't care if you're a Democrat, if you're liberal, whatever you call yourself. If you want to be on the show, You put out your platform, I'll ask the questions. I'm not going to be rude to you or nothing like that. I want you to convey your message and get your vote out to the people that you want to talk to, just like I just did for the U.S. Senate candidate, North Carolina. I'll do it for anybody. Well, I won't do it for anybody. I won't be talking to the atheist party or anything like that. That's just not a direction I'd go in. So I got to be careful. I'll say anybody because I won't talk just to anybody. But I will allow the freedom of speech. You'll be allowed to tell it like it is, how you feel it is, and you'll be able to put your message out there. So each and every time that you think about it, we do a lot in this country, more than other countries do for each other. We're a different society. We're not a third world country. We have a constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, and we need to make sure we use that. Now, of course, there are people that have difference of opinions and things like that, and that's what the country's based on. So when you call me and leaving ugly messages, or you're writing mean little posts, that's okay. You got the right to do that. I have no problem with that, because that's what America's about. I can sit here and tell you I believe in God. God bless America. God bless you. God bless everybody. And that may make people upset, but we have a right to say that, and we'll continue to say that from a law enforcement standpoint and from a personal standpoint. So this is the end of the show. And as always, be yourself, but more importantly, always be right, always be real, and always, always be ready.
The fever burns, sweat it out, wait my turn. Can you hear the drumming? There's a revolution coming. All this doubt is creeping in, inside out, shed my skin.